Okay, hello. As we've now got just enough members to have a quorum meeting, it's time to begin. So, good evening, members and officers of the Council and any members of the public, of which there are none. Welcome to this meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee. So, as housekeeping, the fire evacuation procedure. If the fire alarm is activated, vacate the offices via the stairs. Please do not use the lifts. Assemble in Hawley Square on the green. Officers will assist you and advise when it is deemed safe to return to the chamber. Does anyone intend to film the meeting? No. Okay. Don't need those. Everyone present, please ensure their mobile phones turn to silent. They are not used to make or receive phone calls in the chamber while the meeting is in progress. And please note this meeting is being live streamed for members of the public. The meeting will also be recorded and be subsequently broadcast on the Council's YouTube channel. Are there any councillors who wish to speak under 20.1? Nope. Okay, agenda item 1. Received apologies from Councillor Faruqi and Councillor Donaldson, with Councillor Crittenden subbing.
For whom is she subbing?
Do you want to sub for David or Rupa?
David.
Okay, any other apologies? I'll assume there's an apology from the Conservative Party. Okay, item 2, any declarations of interest? No. Okay, item 3, minutes of previous meetings. Can I have a proposer or a seconder?
Proposed, Chair.
Propose Councillor Scobie. And a seconder? Councillor Garner. Thank you very much. Okay, agenda item 4. Christine Parker, could you please introduce the report?
Thank you very much, Chair. Good evening, members. Paragraph 1.1 on page 11 of the covering report sets out the purpose of this report. The length of the report is fully due to the need for me to fulfil the professional standards. All of the detail that's set out before you in the pages that follow is prescribed by the standards, and it leads to the Head of Internal Auditor's opinion for the year. It is a backward look. It has a final date of the 31st of March 25, and it summarises essentially the last 4 meetings of this committee. So there's nothing new here in this results of the work. You have seen all of these reviews individually come through the quarterly reports, but it's important to kind of look back at the year and ask, so what? What does it all mean? What are the conclusions that we can draw from this? And then what opinion does all of this work evidence? You'll see the headline that Internal Audit has obviously delivered 100% of the days that it promised you last March when we set the plan, and the overall opinion is an overall reasonable assurance. So they're the essential bits, that the key takeaway for you as a committee to understand. But the report then goes on to being in 2 parts. Paragraph 3 of the report sets out all the performance information for the East Kent Audit Partnership as a whole. That's across the 4 councils. And it sets out the targets that we've set and the metrics that we measure and how we've performed against the standards and those targets. And pages 27 and 28 are the balanced scorecard of indicators, which shows, as I say, the performance for the whole partnership across the 4 councils. So again, the headline there is that we have indeed met all of our targets for the year. So the second part of the report is clearly the most important part in terms of summarising the work that we've undertaken. And we provide 3 different views in paragraph 4. So at page 16, paragraph 4.1, the first view of those is the fact that we have raised 176 recommendations throughout the reports that you have seen. And we show there in the table the split between the criticality of critical, high, medium and low risk. So we can see the split there. While 57% were in the critical and high risk categories, none require further escalation back to the committee at this time. The second view then in paragraph 4.2 is the assurances that have been concluded at the time of doing the initial audit. Taken together here, 71% of those assurances are in the substantial and reasonable assurance opinion areas, and this shows a significant improvement over the past 3 successive years for Thanet. And then finally, a key point we always highlight in our quarterly reports is, okay, it's fair enough to undertake the audit, but then there's so what? We come back and do the follow-up audit and give a summary of the implementation of the recommendations there. So in 4.3, we look at the progress reports that have been before the committee, and there were 13 during the year. And there was only one area where there was no assurance after follow-up, and that was highlighted to the committee in the year. The area there was concerning the lack of a management framework, a project management framework, but clearly that has moved on again significantly during the year. Management team implemented the framework in May last year and later have reviewed that and very recently has relaunched the project management framework. So an update on that matter having now been fully implemented. We are due to undertake an independent audit of the project management framework in Q3 of this year. So again, that will come back to the committee to see how that has embedded. So again, there's nothing there to highlight. Then within the recommendation tracking, we've given a further review. We always tell you in the quarterly reports those areas that are yet to be followed up, that have received a lower level of assurance. But the table on page 19, these are ones that we haven't undertaken the follow-up for. They will be scheduled in and will be coming back to the committee in due course. And then we thought it was really important to make sure we had followed through on all of the matters escalated in the 23-24 annual report and later in the report in the 24-25 report. So when we've done our audit, if we've come back and done a progress report and said these matters are still high risk and outstanding at the time of follow-up, we are escalating them effectively to the committee, and it's within the committee's gift to ask management to pop back and give them a progress report at a future date. We thought it was really important to make sure we tell the committee how many of those matters are still yet to be delivered or have been closed by management. So the table there on page 19 leaves you with an update on those matters that have been escalated to the committee in 23-4. We will continue to produce through the Corporate Governance Board. They will be further tracked right through to completion so they can be signed off. So that leads really right through to page 20 and the opinion itself. When we had our external quality assessment, the assessor said, I really like the way that you split your opinion into corporate governance, risk management and internal control, but I would really like to see the overall opinion back. So we've added back paragraph 5.4 into this opinion. And also just for the committee to note, with the new professional standards from next year, it won't be called opinion anymore, which is, I think, a backward step. It will be called a conclusion. But for essentially, we are giving our opinion as required by the standards. So taking you through the opinion, I think the most important paragraph is the 5.2 paragraph. As I say, those are the escalated risks that have been brought to committee at the time of follow-up. They were outstanding and considered to be critical or high risk. There's an update for you there on those. Some have got a completion date in the future and they will be further tracked. And then really the paragraph telling you our summary of those areas where management has responded really, really well and turned around the issues, grounds maintenance, cyber security, network security reviews, all highlighted there, and areas where management are needed to sort of demonstrate a more swifter approach, I think, in accepting those findings was the Tenants' Health and Safety Review and the Employee Benefits and Kind Review, where successive audits have identified the same issues. But there's a strong commitment to those matters being resolved, and we will be bringing the follow-ups for those in due course, which leads to paragraph 5.4, the overall opinion providing a reasonable assurance. And I will just say to committee, it's a real pleasure to be able to give this opinion and read these results to you this evening. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Do councillors have any comments they'd wish to make? Councillor Scobie?
I guess just to welcome the steps forward and maybe just to repeat some of the comments I made in the closed session training, which I think there's been a lot of progress around governance and like steps forward in risk management. You can see that. Anyone who's been on the council for the last couple of years can see that, and I'm sure people who are on the council before that can also see that progress, but I still think there's some work to do. And particularly from this committee's perspective, I still think we sit way too far apart from the ongoing decision making of the council. Even retrospectively looking at process, I think governance and audit is seen as a bit of an afterthought, a bit of irrelevance at times, and it only comes to the fore maybe when something goes wrong, which I guess is what partly we're here for in a way, but I think a lot more prominence could be given to some of these areas, and I don't think we do enough around that. And I think there is some steps that we could take as a committee about how we structure ourselves and how we approach things. Yeah, it's just there was a really good conversation that happened during the training, which I think is worth repeating.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments? Councillor Garner?
Thank you. Yeah, I'd just like to ask about the Tenant Health and Safety Review, please, because you've mentioned that you summarised that the management response didn't significantly change your opinions, although there is a work being done and that will be reported to us soon. How confident are you, based on what's happened previously, that is going to see some significant improvements? And is there anything where you or anyone else can do to make sure that those improvements are seen?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the question. Only today, at a head of service meeting, was a presentation given around the housing regulator and the external inspection programme that's occurring. I see the internal audit as like an early warning system in terms of we've gone in and tested some controls, found some areas, and I think not only because of the audit findings, but also because of the consumer standards, the very high bar being set, and I think the inspection will happen once every 4 years, so it will happen, and we just don't know exactly when. So yeah, I think there's a strong commitment to understanding that, and I think if management accept that the internal audit is an opportunity to make those improvements and see them in bed, that's a really great opportunity that I feel they will do. But yeah, the follow-up to those will have to be timed. I mean, some of those things don't happen on a cyclical basis, and some of them are every 6 months, but we will time those follow-ups as soon as we can to be able to bring the results of those back to the committee.
Lovely. Thank you. Any other comments? No? Lovely. So the recommendations are, firstly, the members note the opinion of the Head for Audit Partnership, and secondly, that members note the annual report detailing the work of the EKAP and its performance to underpin the 2024-25 opinion. Could I have a proposer and a seconder, please?
Chair, just do we have to have a proposer and seconder to note stuff? So I think we'd moved away from that.
Yeah, we can just have a agreement. Agreed. Lovely. Okay, on to item 5. The quarterly internal audit update report. Simon Webb, could you please introduce?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. I'm Simon Webb, the Deputy Head of the East Kent Audit Partnership. This agenda item is the quarterly internal audit update report. For members that are new to the committee, this is a report that you will see each and every quarter. It summarises the work done by the East Kent Audit Partnership on your behalf in the last quarter, together with details of our performance, in this case up to the 31st of May 2025. If I could draw your attention to the table on page 33 of the agenda pack, that summarises the 6 new audits completed during this period. During the presentation of the annual internal audit report, Christine mentioned the very positive direction of travel that we are seeing at Thanet in recent months and indeed over the last couple of years. And that continues with the audits that we're reporting this evening as part of the quarterly update report. So the table on page 33 summarises 6 new audits, of which we're very pleased to conclude substantial in 4 areas and reasonable in 2. 2 of those areas were work undertaken on your behalf by Partnership 1, previously East Kent Services. One was a review of their new governance arrangements, and the other was a review of housing benefit overpayments. Reviews of members' allowances and also the receipt and opening of tenders also concluded substantial assurance. Business continuity and emergency planning, that was a very solid, reasonable, and we were very pleased to be able to conclude that. It's a very important part of the council business, and I think it also goes somewhat hand in hand with the very strong, reasonable assurance that we recently concluded on cyber security, which was reported to a previous meeting of this committee. Also, housing recharges, first time that that has been audited since the service came back in-house from East Kent Housing. And compared to some of your neighbours, much more positive results. A fairly strong, reasonable assurance in that area. There are recommendations for improvement, and of course we will be following them up and reporting those to a future meeting of this committee. But very positive direction of travel, very pleasing results. An important part of internal audit work is obviously follow-up. Typically about 3 months after each audit we go back to see if management have implemented the recommendations that they agreed to. During the period under review we undertook 2 follow-ups, and they're summarised in the table on page 39. One was a review of cemeteries and crematoria. Very pleased to see all of the recommendations, bar 1, which was a low priority recommendation, have been implemented in that area. And so we revised the assurance opinion from reasonable up to substantial. The other area was a second follow-up. Occasionally, if the risk warrants it, we will go back and do more than 1 follow-up. And this was one of those areas. Grounds maintenance, very pleased indeed with the work undertaken by Tony Marmo and his team, who report into Mike Humber. And as a result of the follow-up, that assurance opinion has gone up from reasonable to substantial. But I would draw your attention to the text underneath the table on page 39 that indicates the original assurance level in that area was no assurance. There were very significant concerns. So the turnaround that we've seen is, well, substantial, if you pardon the pun. So very pleasing indeed. It really does show what can be done, and no outstanding recommendations at all after second follow-up. The annexes to the report are ones that you will see each quarter. Probably the most important one there is Annex 1, which shows progress against the agreed 25-26 internal audit plan. It's up to the 31st of May, so it's very early in the year. At 31st of May, we'd done 7.78% of the plan. I can update that to the 30th of June, we were up to 16%. We are a fraction behind the first quarter target, obviously, of 25%, but confident we've plenty of time to catch up as the year progresses. Appendix 2 to the agenda pack, which is on page 45. For those that are new to the committee, well worth reading that one. It is the SIPFA assurance statement definitions. So when we say substantial assurance, reasonable assurance, that's what we mean. Also, there are definitions of the recommendation priorities. So we categorise our recommendations critical, high, medium or low. And there are the definitions that we use in respect of each of those recommendations. Appendix 3 on page 46, that would be any high or critical recommendations that we're escalating after follow-up. Very pleased to report there's none to escalate this quarter because they've all been done. Page 47 details those follow-ups that are yet to be done. Most of those are starting to become work in progress, and I would hope that the majority of them will come forward to the October meeting of this committee. Tenant health and safety was one that was just mentioned, and you can see that that is listed for follow-up. So that table is very much to keep those on the radar, so you can see what's coming up in future quarters. There would normally be one other appendix to that, which is a balanced scorecard, but this time that's attached to the annual report. Next time it will be attached to the quarterly report. That's it from me, Chair, but obviously happy to take any questions that any member may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do councillors have any questions? No, you've clearly done a very good job then. Oh, Councillor Munns.
I was just looking through the schedule and I saw software licensing. And what's the scope of the licensing? It's something I've raised before during the CAGs, because I see that as a significant risk if that's not under control in terms of financial, amongst other things.
Thank you, Councillor. It's one that's planned for later in the financial year. What we would do there is seek to ensure that all software that is used by the council across laptops, etc., is fully licensed, and equally that we're not paying for software that we don't use anymore. So there's two prongs to it.
Okay, yeah, I'm just more of an under license and over license scenario, really. I mean, that's the risk that you could end up being audited by a software vendor and then being penalised. And I think that's the area that would concern me more. Oh, well, over licensing is not an ideal, it's the under licensing that's going to cause you significant financial impact.
Okay, any others? Lovely. Okay, so the recommendations for this item are that the report be received by members, that any changes to the agreed 2025-26 internal audit plans resulting from changes in perceived risk detailed in point 5 of Annex 1 be approved. Do we all agree? Lovely. Okay, on to item 6. Audit progress report and sector updates. So we've got Darren Wells from Grant Thornton this evening. So, Mr. Wells, could you please introduce the report?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. So this first paper does exactly what it says in the title. It gives a very brief overview of where we are on audits. Page 55 of your papers recaps where we are in respect of 22-23 and 23-24 audits, and what we've done to date on the 24-25 audit. In summary, we have completed the risk assessment and planning, and that's allowed us to produce an audit plan, which is the next agenda item. The rest of the report just provides for your information sector updates that we think might be of interest to you. Happy to take any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you. Do councillors have questions? Not. Okay. I think they. Okay, so if we then move on to. So we're all happy to move on to the next item. Lovely. So item 7. We're back to you, Darren. So external audit plan.
Thank you, Chair. So as I said, this is the audit plan. It sets out the results of the risk assessment for 24-25. It sets the broad environment in which the audit's undertaken and the challenges that you have to face, and the operating environment in which you have to face those challenges. We highlight those risks that we consider to be significant, and that's where we devote most audit effort. They tend to be in areas of judgment or estimation, and many of those are common to many authorities across the country. We have identified one specific risk here, and that's in respect of the transfer to a new general ledger from which the accounts are produced. So we will look at the complete and accurate transfer of data from the old system to the new system. We highlight what we consider to be materiality, because that drives the sampling and testing for the financial statements audit. The other key area is we highlight what we intend to do around value for money to give the conclusion on the effectiveness of your arrangements for value for money. And then the rest of the plan highlights those things that auditing standards require us to report to you. Happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you. So, do councillors have any comments or questions on this item? Councillor Scobie?
So first one, thank you very much for the reports, and we had quite a few conversations with your colleague previously around concerns around delays, looking at our accounts and the impact that may have on the public's confidence in the council's finances, especially in a council that's had a tarred reputation, to speak quite frankly, in the past. What confidence can we have that the 24-25 audit deliverables timeline that's included in your report, that we can meet that? Obviously there's a question on that for the council side, but from a Grant Thornton perspective, do you think you can resource that, and how confident you are that we can achieve that?
Thank you, Councillor. Through you, Chair. So I am confident that we can meet that timeline, but it's to be absolutely clear, we won't get to a position of issuing an unqualified opinion for 24-25, given where we are in the prior years. But we will certainly undertake work to provide a roadmap of where we've been able to start to rebuild assurance. So we'll make it very clear on where we are and what still needs to be tackled going forward. The statutory backstop effectively brings that guillotine, so we won't be able to go beyond that. Early discussions between us and the finance team, we both sides know what needs to be done, and we're certainly ready to do what we need to do from our side.
And then just a follow-up question. I hadn't really sort of clocked, is it IFRS 16 and what that might mean for, I don't know if this is a question for you or the finance team. Could somebody just explain that a little bit in quite layman's terms, just so I can understand the impact? And then how do we think that could impact Thanet? Are we talking about that this might, potentially change our books going forward, so we may have less revenue? Is it something that is just going to be an accounting exercise and won't really impact our ability to fund services? I'm just wondering if you or someone else could potentially just give us a little bit more information on that.
Sure. I'm happy to start, and I'm sure Matt may well have some comments to make as well. So it is a change, and the change really is limited to the council as a lessee. Previously, leases were defined in two ways. They were either a finance lease or an operating lease. Finance lease meant that as a council you bore all the risks of any associated asset, and therefore they were already recognised on your balance sheet. With operating leases, it effectively said you didn't own the asset, and you recognised the cost of leasing through your income and expenditure account. The change is that this new standard does away with that distinction between a finance lease and an operating lease. and it requires the council, where it has a lease arrangement that involves a specific asset, it requires the council to bring that onto its balance sheet as an asset, and also recognise a corresponding liability. So that's the principle. There's a lot more detail around how you ensure it's complete and accurate. What I can't tell you, being new to the council, is how significant it is, particularly for you as a council.
I think it's, sorry, Chair, jumped the gun a bit.
Yeah, I was just saying that.
We've been reviewing this since the change was announced. It's been kicking around for 4 or 5 years, so it isn't anything new. Our expectations are there are no major changes for us in terms of what we've got in terms of leases, because we've been taking that into consideration and not going out for new leases that are going to have a financial detriment to us since the change in legislation was announced. So there's no major concerns for us from an accounting perspective.
Okay. Chris, you've also got some comments.
Thank you. I just wanted to add, I think it's a really good question, and there will be some authorities that are caught by this lease standard, and what it will do effectively, it will increase the value of their assets, but also their liabilities on their balance sheet. So you've got a two-sided effect. As Matt's rightly said, we don't have a large number of leases. It's partly due to the fact a lot of the services that we've got are in-house. So, for example, we don't lease our vehicles, we buy them, stuff like that. If we were a council that had outsourced lots of those services, you could find out that you've got leases for equipment and assets that kind of embedded into the contract arrangement, and then all of a sudden you've got to bring all of those assets onto your balance sheet. You know, so if we had Veolia or someone else running our waste service, we wouldn't just be showing a revenue payment up to the contractor. We'd have to bring onto the balance sheet to show, actually, by sort of, it's implied that we kind of own, and as Mr. Wells was saying, we've got the risks associated with these assets, and that's why they're going onto the balance sheet. I don't particularly like the lease standard, if I'm honest with you, but I understand why they're doing it.
Councillor Kobe?
And then just a different question. You flag up the risk around local government reorganisation and how that's going to impact lots of different things. I don't think that we've got it on our risk register. I'm looking at Amy. I don't think it's on our risk register. Is that something that you'd recommend that we should include? Because obviously, you know, for the future of the council and the impact it's going to have, is that something that, from what you're seeing elsewhere, other councils are including on their risk register?
Thank you, through you, Chair. So I don't think I'd go as far as to say I would recommend it's on your risk register currently. I think in the coming months, year, that it should be featuring, because it will have a profound effect quite clearly. So I can certainly see a point when it needs to come on to the risk register.
Okay, I've got a comment from Chris and then from Max.
Thank you, Chair. Amy and I actually have discussed this. It is an emerging risk. It's one that we've got on our radar. It's just not on the corporate risk register. We thought long and hard about how do you reflect this? What's the risk? What does it really mean? If you're going to kind of be introspective and think about the council itself, well, we don't exist, so that's quite a significant risk. But what I was more interested in, what is the impact on service delivery? What's the impact on residents? At the moment, we don't really know that, so I was more interested in actually, from day one, can we still have a waste service going? Do we still have a effective housing option service going? And I think, as Mr. Wells was saying, it will be once we've got greater detail on the transition itself and how that is being managed, I think you will start to see that on the risk register. But at the moment, I think it would be a little bit too introspective and thinking, oh, the council won't exist, so what? What does that really mean for the resident? And that's, I think, how it will play out in the future.
Okay, Matt?
Thanks, Chair. Not to be swerving it, but I was going to say something similar to Chris. So.
Okay, lovely. Do we have any other comments? Okay, so the recommendation is that the external audit plan is noted. Do councillors agree? Agreed. Okay. So on to point 8, the annual Treasury Management Review. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Chair. This report provides the annual backward look on Treasury management for 24-25, summarising the Treasury management activity and prudential Treasury indicators for the past financial year. The highlights are Council's gross debt at the end of March 2025 was 37.1 million. That was well within our authorised limits of 154.5 million and less than our capital financing requirement of 75.1 million. Again, that's indicating compliance with our prudential indicators. Our overall holding of debt was up from 19.6 million at the end of the previous financial year. That's largely due to additional external borrowing that we're taking on throughout the year relating to the Council's housing capital schemes, both in the General Fund and the HRA. Investment balances at the year end were 35.4 million. That's down from 41.7 million the year prior. The report also notes the Council has maintained an under-borrowing position throughout the year using our internal cash resources and did not take any debt rescheduling due to unviable rates or unattractive rates. Our overall investment income was just shy of 1.9 million. That exceeded our budget of 1.645 mil, although the average rate of return that we got was 4.96, so that's just slightly below the benchmark compound rate of 5.04%. It confirms, the report confirms compliance with all our reporting requirements and our investment policy. There's a minor exception, which is in relation to a money market fund limit that was temporarily exceeded due to a banking error on behalf of one of our counterparties. This caused the Council's £6 million limit for that fund to be exceeded by £11,245 for the period from the 15th to the 18th of November 2024. The report concludes with a recommendation that the Governance and Audit Committee notes the indicators, makes comments and recommends the report to Council for approval. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Do councillors have any comments they'd like to make? Councillor Scobie?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So less sort of a question and probably more of a comment and maybe a request on this, which is this is my 9th year on Governance and Audit Committee. I don't think I've ever understood Treasury management reports, and I'm not sure it's entirely that I'm supposed to. I think one of the things we just had a training around the role of a Governance and Audit Committee, and one of the things that Christine in her sort of presentation talking about audit was saying that we potentially should have independent members. And I know, Chris, you talked about how there'd been that conversation about potentially combining it with standards and using those independent members. I was going to say, if there was any part of the governance and audit agenda where this council might be improved by having somebody on here that can sit there and say, yeah, everything that Chris has just said, everything in this report is good, I think this would be the area. So I don't know if it might be worth conversations being had about that being something we look at in the future, about having an independent member added to this committee that had a background in more of a financial side to provide some experience, because otherwise my concern is that these reports come on and we as councillors will sit here and go, that all sounds absolutely fine, and I have no idea. I absolutely trust the team we've got here, but I can't tell you with any confidence that what Chris said is correct or not. So I just wonder if that's something that we may want to write to the chair of constitutional review to consider, which is probably the right forum, because it's got all of the group leaders from the parties, and this if they wanted to do that would have a financial impact, so it's not something that we can decide, or I think that cabinet can decide, but I don't know what the right mechanism might be, but maybe if we as a committee can write to the chair of constitutional review to consider at a future meeting.
Yeah, well, that's definitely worth minuting as something to do. Do we have any other comments or questions?
Yeah. These independent people, would they be paid or would they be volunteers?
Yeah, Chris.
Yes, they are paid, but it's a relatively small allowance. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Do we have any other No other comments? So the recommendations are that we note the actual 24-25 prudential and treasury indicators in the report, make any comments as appropriate to the report, and recommend this report to council for approval. Are we saying the Councillor Scobie's suggestion of asking the Constitutional Review Committee about whether to have an independent person or persons on this committee should be comments on this report?
Well, maybe if the report is going to go to council, we can add that comment, and then it will be up to council or you know, leadership to pick that up with Constitutional Review. That might be the best way then, if people are happy with that.
Okay, so for this one we will need a proposer and a seconder. So Councillor Scobie as proposer, Councillor Garner as seconder. Okay, do members agree?
Agree.
Great, lovely. We are racing through this. Right, point 9, which is the draft 24-25 statement of accounts. This is for you, Chris.
Back to me again, thank you, Chair. So this report updates the committee on the progress of publishing the council's draft 24-25 accounts and outlines, as Mr Wells has just said, some of the key dates around the upcoming audit. The report highlights the council's successful, timely publication of the draft accounts despite historical challenges within the team, and also, as has been referred to earlier, recent implementation of a new finance system. It also recommends, if members agree, establishing an accounts subgroup that will allow for a detailed review of the draft accounts, aiming to enhance transparency and understanding for the committee. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, do we have any comments or questions from councillors?
So you've swapped your computer accounting system. Has the changeover gone smoothly? Have there been any huge hiccups?
I'm always going to say yes with the auditors in the room. Matt has been far closer to the detail than I have, and I think it could have gone, it couldn't have gone any better really, as far as we could be realistic with our expectations. There's always going to be some teething issues. There were a few instances where things weren't up quite as speedily as we would have liked to have, and we had some backlogs that we had to deal with that resulted in some delays in processing invoices. But largely, by and large, I would say it's been positive. Matt, I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to add to that?
Exactly that, and the feedback so far, now that everything is up and running and working as it should be, the feedback generally from the departments is the system is better than what we had previously. Things are improving, people are becoming more familiar. We're still rolling out training, we're making sure everyone's up to speed, and there's more developments and progress to be made over the next few months up until October, when we'll be launching another part of the system, which will create greater flexibility for the management team in terms of the way they monitor, the way they look at budget monitoring, so it will create more resilience as well moving forward. So that's all in hand and progressing. So.
Okay, lovely. Do we have any further comments or questions? No? Lovely. So, recommendations are that the committee notes that the council publish its draft accounts on the 30th of June in accordance with statutory deadlines, and the committee agrees to establish an accounts subgroup to undertake a detailed review of the draft accounts. Do we all agree?
Agree.
Good. Okay, been advised for this one we do actually need a proposer and seconder. So, Councillor Scobie as proposer, Councillor Garner seconder. And do we all agree? Yeah. Okay, on to item 10, the quarterly risk update. Amy Jackson.
Thank you, Chair. And good evening all. Tonight I would like to present the quarterly risk report. So for the benefit of any new members, our authority monitors and manages its corporate risk through the Corporate Risk Register. The contents of this report highlight the high priority corporate risks, show the arrangements that have been put in place to ensure these risks are monitored and managed appropriately. The report represents a snapshot at the end of May 2025, so where the risk was and also the mitigations at that point. So please bear in mind that some of these risks might have moved on since then. Risks have to be assessed in respect of the combination of the likelihood of something happening and the impact arising as a result. So risk management includes identifying and assessing risks and responding to them. At staff level, the Corporate Risk Register is regularly considered by the Corporate Management Team and, of course, the Governance and Audit Committee, which considers changes to the Corporate Risk Register, reasons for the changes, and the actions being taken to mitigate the likelihood and the impact of those risks. A view can also be taken regarding the extent to which the risk should be tolerated, treated, terminated, or transferred. Now, members will note that there is a second recommendation on the corporate risk report this cycle, which asks the committee to agree to establish a risk management strategy subgroup. This is to review the development and updating of the new risk management strategy. This will be a great opportunity to engage with around about 5 or 6 of you on the strategy progress to date, for me to gain feedback, discuss and listen to your ideas, and for us all to drive a strategy that is relevant, understandable, relatable, and successful for both officers and members. So on to the report. You will have seen there's been 3 movements on the corporate risk report. I shall give you a brief overview of each, and of course there'll be time for questions afterwards. So if members can turn their attention to page 180, you will note that the limited resource has been now updated to a score of 16 from a score of 12. The likelihood score is the one that has increased to 4. Just briefly, the increase in the score for this risk reflects a significant overspend for 2024 to 25. The Council is taking action to address key overspend areas by budget monitoring rigorously throughout the financial year. And of course, Chris is on hand to answer further questions on this subject. If we can now look at page 183, you will note that the Environment Act likelihood has actually reduced to 3, so that makes now a total score of 12. So just to give you a brief overview on why this is, the risk report provides an update on the corporate risks relating to the Environment Act. The risk posed has reduced as a result of more clarity on the scale of extended producer responsibility funding received by the Council and requirements associated with DEFRA's simpler recycling plans. A report to Cabinet on changes to household waste and recycling collections in response to simpler recycling will be considered at Cabinet tomorrow. The Act is wide-reaching and includes the strengthening of local powers in relation to air quality enforcement, and also includes provisions to strengthen and improve the duty on public bodies to conserve and enhance biodiversity. So as a result of greater clarity on future requirements for waste and recycling, the overall score for this risk has been reduced to 12 as of this month. So to ensure the various requirements of the Act are adequately assessed, it is proposed to split this risk by type to allow more accurate scores to be produced for each area affected by the Act. The splitting of this risk type will be undertaken ahead of the next risk report for the Governance and Audit meeting in October. And finally, great news, we've actually managed to remove a risk from going forwards from the risk report. So this is on page 187, and this is groundwater risk assessments. So yeah, really pleased to announce that this risk will be removed. So quite some time ago in November, revised guidance on groundwater risk assessments was published, which led to a need to carry out assessments at 2 of our cemeteries. New legislation in 2022 required cemeteries to be permitted unless they met certain requirements. So the overall risk score was really quite high because no assessment had been carried out. The impact of requiring a permit or a breach in statutory compliance could have been quite severe. The assessment has now been completed and outcome reports have been received, so it's now confirmed that the Council is meeting statutory requirements. No permit is required, so the risk can now be removed from the corporate and service list level risk registers following the update being reported to the committee tonight. So that concludes the summary of the quarterly risk report. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Amy. Do councillors have any comments or questions? Councillor Scobie.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Amy, for your report. And I think really good progress happening with some of those risks. I do want to point out, I think I've said a number of times in the past that we need another layer to the risk register. And I know that's in discussion and can be part of the risk management strategy. But I think the last few months have really evidenced that, because if you look at the most severe line in your impact assessment is financial loss or overspend greater than 500,000. And yet one of the risks we're talking about, the financial overspend of, is over 4 million? 4.7 million. So comparing that to another risk that might also be a 4 for impact, but could just be 500,000 and £1, they're not the same. One is that they both have massive impacts on the council, don't get me wrong, but the second one is of an order of magnitude. So I think obviously it's going to be part of your strategy to look at that, but I think that risk specifically evidences why there needs to be another tier above that that's going to be, I don't know, financial impact 1 million, 1.5 million. But so that was sort of a comment. Second sort of question, and I'm not sure I have an answer here, but I'm sort of scratching my head a little bit on limited resources and economic environment as risks on the risk register, because they're both impactors, they're both causes, but then they're having knock-on impacts on other risks. So again, I'm not entirely sure how they sort of fit together. But if you think about it, limited resources has gone up as a result of homelessness as a risk impacting on the council finances. So I'm not 100% sure whether we should have risk correlated in that way, where you could have 2 or 3 of them all moving at the same point and getting more severe. It might be better to have, if we're already assessing financial impact, limited resources and the impact on the finances are already being assessed as part of one risk. So I'm not sure why it necessarily needs to be covered twice. And then sort of a final question really was linked to that, I guess, is around the level of reserves. And I guess this is a question for Matt and Chris, because obviously we've got two things coming in at the same time here, which is we've had our accounts haven't had an opinion given for some time. So there's that question we hear from our external auditors that we can't be 100% sure what your reserves are. So there's a little bit of a question mark there. We've now got a financial situation where our reserves themselves are going to be eaten into quite a lot in the next year, and potentially for longer, who knows. And so my question is, do we have a problem around our reserves? Is that something that we should be zooming in on a little bit more? Because limited resources and economic environment are causes of that, but actually the output here is that it's the strain on the reserves. I'm not sure that's been properly covered on the risk register, but I don't know if that's because it's not foreseen as a risk.
Chris?
Thank you, Chair. Really good question. If I'm sort of tracking those risks and how they've developed, there's probably a little bit of legacy, and there probably is time for some reflection about how we present that going forward. And there has been development of the risk strategy over time. Both of them are quite long-standing risks. I think they've been here as long as I have, and probably longer than that. The limit of resources was very much framed originally around reductions in central government funding, certainly during the austerity period, and what that would mean for us. But it's probably being framed more around just overall limited resources. But you're right that the drivers for that are largely reflected in some of the other risks. The economic environment one, again, was linked to impacts, I think going back to Brexit, and impacts on the supply base and our ability to get hold of suppliers. And again, has developed a little bit. So I think there's opportunity, again, for reflection on that in the next risk cycle. I won't pull any punches when I say the trends of reserves in terms of the amount that's been taken out of reserves during 24-25 is concerning. And there was only so much I could say in this report, because it was published one day before the Cabinet report that's going to discuss that in more detail tomorrow night. And it's really important that the sort of causes or the drivers for those overspends are addressed, and action will be taken to try and mitigate those spending pressures as much as possible. And that will be very much as part of Mr. Wells' view when he provided his value for money opinion on our arrangements to, our financial sustainability over the what now is a medium rather than a long term. Effectively, we have best part of £10 million that we need to ensure lasts us this and the next 2 financial years. We cannot overspend by £5 million or 4.75 million for the next 3 years. We will run out of money before LGR happens. So we need to address those overspends, and I'm sure Darren will be looking in a lot of detail at the arrangements we've got to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Thank you. Councillor Scobie again.
Well, just as a follow-up to that, and because this is really difficult, sort of, I think, for us as members to understand. Like you live this, Darren, this is your job. You know, Matt, this is your job. You look at this all the time. I don't really fully I see like the headline number, and I had a session with you, Matt, last year, which opened my eyes a little bit more to the reserves. But I wonder if we could have a report for like the future meeting, because there's decisions being made by the cabinet, and they're making the policy decisions around what's taking place and what they're spending money on. Then there's your powers, Chris, as the Section 151 officer, to say, you know, whether we have enough money, and then there's the external auditors, and we're sort of stuck in the middle. We have a role in this, but I don't think we really understand it. And if there was a short report, I'm not expecting like a massive one, just saying this is what reserves we have. This is like the picture over the last 10, 15 years, because some of it's allocated, some of it's not, some of it's money we're holding for projects, some of it's not. It just helped to sort of understand that a bit more. So then when this comes up in the future, and we hear things like external auditors saying we can't give you a full set of accounts, or not full set of accounts, we can't give you a proper opinion on the accounts because we can't tell you how much reserves there are, and that might be an issue going forwards. We understand the context of that a bit more, because I feel like as chair for the last 2 years, I'm a little bit more involved in that, and I don't fully understand it. So.
Okay, Chris, wants to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Again, I would welcome comments from Mr. Wells and from Internal Audit on their views as well. I think probably the right place to do that is here, in terms of bringing something possibly around the process of budget setting. So rather than getting into policy around what the content of particular spend decisions are, I think we could bring something to committee that looks at the process that we go through setting the budget, with reserves being a key aspect of that, particularly over the next 2.5 years that we get through if the committee are in agreement with that. So we'd welcome comments from Mr. Wells and Ms. Parker as well.
Yeah, Mr.
Thank you. So I think comments, I suspect my predecessor may have said around the ability to give assurance on reserves, it was thinking about usable reserves, so cash back reserves, as well as, and perhaps more difficultly, the unusable reserves, which are all the accounting entries that we would need to have the assurance from prior years. So I understand the position. I think what for this committee, what you do have to remember is that the first line of defence is the Section 151 officer's statement about the adequacy or not of the reserves at the time of setting the budget and the medium-term financial strategy. So that's the starting point, and then there's almost a continuous monitoring duty on the Section 151 officer to highlight when he thinks there's a risk that the council can't sustain itself in the medium term, and that there's an increase in spectrum with the adverse impact being calling to the council's full attention a Section 114 notice to say we need to halt spending because we're not financially sustainable, and that then triggers a whole host of other items. So there are defence and control mechanisms in place, but it is right, because it is a collective responsibility for all members to be aware and to have that understanding.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I was going to say something similar to Chris. So as part of the budget setting process, in order for Chris to be able to sign off on the notice as described by Darren, we'll do a risk analysis of reserves anyway, so I'll do a risk assessment as part of that process. So as we did last year, so before any decision was taken to draw down money to support the budget process, there was a risk assessment done in relation to reserves to make sure that sufficient was available. I think it's fair to say the last 2 years with regards to homelessness and issues with housing benefit, there was an expectation for homelessness specifically that the impact of that was going to die off. The council, as you know, has signed off on a huge number of projects specifically to deliver a reduction in the cost associated with homelessness. Those projects coming online will have an impact on that moving forward. So we've got a degree of confidence that's being built up as a result of those projects that we won't be looking at a sort of two, because 3 million was between homelessness and HB, and unforeseen to some extent, but the housing benefit element of it in particular and homelessness were factored into the budget proposals. So though last year's budget in terms of setting for 25-26 included growth specifically to mitigate the impact of that. So we don't envisage seeing the same numbers. I think the problem with homelessness in particular is that despite our efforts as an organisation to try and build money in and to reduce the impact of homelessness, as fast as we come up with projects to deliver new schemes, more people have historically presented homeless. So there isn't a correlation between what we're doing in terms of investment and their costs as they increase. And I think the thing for that gives us another degree of assurance to some extent, although perversely, is that we're not the only ones in that situation. Chris has said on a number of occasions, unitaries are talking about the impact of homelessness, and in the context of their budgets, for them to be discussing it, they are big numbers. So I think that we have plans, we're working towards it, there will be a risk assessment done. But like Chris said, I think there is an opportunity to bring a separate document that talks about how that fits into the budget cycle to give you a bit more assurance moving forward.
Thank you, Matt. Councillor Scott?
Yeah, and I'm confident all these processes happen, but again, we're lay people, and the reports that you have to write and send to us are written in a way and a structure that has to follow a certain thing. What I'm thinking of is just a very simple report. It could even be training if we don't want to have something that's specifically on agenda, so we can, as members, can learn more about the reserves and how they operate. Because for me, you were going into some of the policy decisions and some of the stuff like that, and again, that as soon as you start going into that, I'm like, that's a cabinet scrutiny conversation. But my sort of question on this is, every single one of those risks on the risk register, the biggest mitigation against how big that risk is going to be that the council has a big pile of money. Like, being blunt, a big pile of money or a really good insurance policy. So if that big pile of money goes, or the ability to use it goes, suddenly that 15 million becomes 10, it becomes 6. A lot of these risks become a lot harder to deal with. And I just want to understand that a bit more. That specifically, rather than we made this decision and that led to that, because that is for elsewhere, but I don't really fully understand how some of these risks come through. And that sort of comes back to sort of that question to you, Amy, around, limited resource and economic environment, and whether that's a cause or an impact. I don't know.
Okay. Did any officers want to respond to that?
Thank you. Yeah, I think actually on reflection, some training ahead of the next committee and sort of a closed session would allow myself and Amy, we can talk probably just in greater detail around that risk and how we're going to present it going forward with the context of the reserve position. If you're happy with that, just allow for a bit more of a fluid discussion, and then we can make sure that is represented formally in the risk report going forward. We could even have a section in the risk report that sets out as Matt said, the risk assessment on reserves, because it's all relevant when you're assessing the overall risk scores to know what our reserve position is and the risks associated with it.
Okay, thank you. Councillors,
Again, I think this is probably in that area. I mean, I didn't know about the 4.7 million that we're down. When we've been in council meetings and group meetings and things, we've always been discussing that temporary housing and so on was a big problem for many authorities. We have been trying to tackle it by spending money to get higher level. I'm just concerned that I don't fully understand how we're getting there. That's probably not for this meeting, but we need to be able to better understand our risks and liabilities as part of that.
Chris?
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of homelessness itself, as Matt said earlier, we're not alone in this. There's neighbouring authorities that have got comparable overspends, and unitary authorities are talking about this being a big risk for them, and their budgets are orders of magnitude larger than ours. In terms of tackling it going forward, I know that Cabinet are going to receive some quarterly update reports on housing progress, but perhaps at the same time we could look to do a member briefing alongside it to allow members to sort of understand what's going on in that arena alongside the Cabinet report.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments or questions? No. Okay. So there's two recommendations on here. So the first is Governance and Audit Committee is asked to approve the Corporate Risk Management Quarterly Report and Notice of Progress Update. We've got a second one which we'll need proposing and seconding, that we agree to establish a risk management strategy subgroup to review the development and update of the new risk management strategy. And do we want to make training on financial position of the council a third recommendation? Okay, so we'll add that as a third recommendation. So I think the first one, do we agree to approve the corporate risk management quarterly report? Okay. Yeah, so for the second point, I'd like to propose.
Do you want to ask Councillor Scobie to propose all three recommendations as opposed to doing them separately?
Yeah, I can do that. Okay. So we can have proposed from seconder for all three. So propose second.
Thank you.
Lovely. And we can move on to the 11th and final point, the waivers report. So, Matt Sanham, could you introduce the report?
Thanks, Chair. I'll do it as a whistle-stop tour. This report updates the committee on the council's use of waivers to its previous contract standing orders. So obviously we've moved to contract procedure rules, we've updated as a result of changes in legislation, but this is a backward look for 24-25. The purpose of the report is to provide oversight of the application of waivers to the council's procedure rules, setting out the number of instances and the rationales for the decisions taken by officers. There is a lot of information within the report, but in simple terms we are looking at the number of times we've waived internal process. In summary, there have been 19 waiver applications received in 24-25. Of the waivers received, all 19 were approved, with 17 being below the 140k threshold and 0 waiver applications being rejected. In comparison to 23-24 period, 41 waiver applications were received during that time, with 10 rejections, demonstrating 22 fewer waivers received overall in 24-25 and 12 fewer approved than in the previous year. Overall, the significant reduction in waivers in 24-25 shows a large improvement from previous years and demonstrates that the waiver applications continue to remain a robust process to be used in exceptional circumstances. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Do we have any comments or questions from councillors? Councillor Garner?
Thank you. That wasn't my comment. It's a minor thing really, but I was looking at the list of waivers and they don't seem to be categorised correctly, as in some of them come under place when it seems they should come under environment. I'm sure it's not a major thing. I'm looking, for instance, on page 214, and there's one about, which is place, and there's one about Ramsgate berths 2 and 3. And then on the next page there's a harbour arm one that both seem as if they should be under environment rather than place. So
I'll pick that up. It sounds like they've gone out of sync, Chair.
Yeah. Matt, could,
Sorry.
oh. Oh, Mike.
Thank you, Chair. If I can pick that up. Looking at it, so we've got the Berth 2, 3 and a harbour arm. Both of those were part of the Ramsgate Pathfinder programme, so part of the, so you've got the port infrastructure project, and then the harbour arm is a property project. So I think for that reason, both of those are in place, although I agree they're both on harbours, which you'd think would be an environment, but I think it's because of the origin of the projects or the departments that have led them that they're in place. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Do we have any other comments, questions? No. Lovely. So recommendation for this is that we just note the report. Do councillors agree? Agreed. Agreed. Lovely. Right, we'll finish the meeting. Thank you for everyone coming out this evening.